Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the TDFS constellation and watched the sensor data with growing dread in her chest. 50 years had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Council, and in that time Earth had worked so hard to be accepted. By the older species, humans had hidden their violent past and presented themselves as rational and peaceful beings, who wanted nothing more than to learn from the advanced civilizations that filled the galaxy that other species had been condescending. But tolerant and humanity had swallowed its pride. Now Sarah looked at readings that made no sense because they showed nothing where a thriving world should be. The Ketheri homeworld, designated as Kether Prime, should have been broadcasting billions of biological signatures. Instead, the sensors showed 0, nothing. Lived on the planet below? Take us into orbit, Sarah ordered, and her voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. The Ketheri had been humanity's first real friends in the galaxy. They were a gentle, herbivorous species who reminded humans of deer crossed with meerkats, and they stood upright on 2 legs with large, expressive eyes. When other species had mocked humanity's crude technology and backward ways, the Ketheri had offered friendship. Without judgment, Ketheri scientists had collaborated with human researchers in Ketheri. Children had sent drawings to Earth schools. 7 billion Ketheri had lived on this world just 3 weeks ago. Ship's AI began analyzing atmospheric composition. And Sarah's second officer, Commander Marcus, Webb looked at her with sick recognition in his eyes. Admiral, the atmosphere contains residual traces of chemical weapons, Marcus said quietly. Multiple types, including nerve agents and biological compounds, designed to target Ketheri physiology specifically. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment. The distress signals had been fragmented and desperate to Ketheri. Voices screaming for help and begging the Council to send aid. By the time the Council had finished debating proper procedures and forming an investigation committee, it had been too late. Launch survey drones, Sarah commanded. I want a full planetary scan. The drones deployed and began their grim work. What they found would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. Cities that had housed millions were burned to ash. Farmlands where poisoned water sources were contaminated with toxins. But worst of all were the shelters. The Ketheri had tried to save their children by hiding them in underground bunkers. Attackers had found every single shelter and pumped them full of gas. The drones sent back images of small bodies huddled together. Carrie, parents had died trying to shield their young with their own bodies. Who did this? Marcus whispered. Sarah's jaw clenched. The Viraxis Combine. She pulled up the intelligence reports that had come too late to matter. The Viraxis were a predatory empire that viewed other species as either threats or resources, had demanded the Ketheri hand over their mining rights to 3 mineral-rich moons when the Ketheri had refused politely and appealed to Council law. The Viraxis had decided to simply take what they wanted, but they hadn't just taken the moons, they had exterminated an entire species to send a message to anyone else who might refuse them. Bring me everything, Sarah said. Every scan, every image, every piece of data, and find me those final transmissions. The communications officer worked quickly, and soon Sarah was listening to recordings that would be burned into her memory forever. Ketheri mother singing to her child as the shelter systems failed. Teacher trying to keep students calm as they heard the hissing of gas entering their refugee government. Officials sending one last message to the galaxy, begging someone to remember that the Ketheri had existed and to not let their deaths mean nothing. Sarah saved every file and encrypted them with her personal codes. Council investigation team arrived 4 hours later. They were led by Ambassador Quell of the Civisti, who was a species that looked like floating jellyfish and spoke through electronic translators. Admiral Chen Quell's translator made clicking sounds that approximated concern. This is indeed tragic, but you should not have approached the planet without waiting for Council authorization. Sarah turned to face the ambassador, and she kept her expression neutral. Despite the rage building inside her, 7 billion people are dead, she said. Every single Ketheri is gone, and you're concerned about protocol. The protocols exist for good reason. Quell replied. We must gather evidence properly to present to the Council judiciary. Will there be consequences for the Viraxis? Sarah asked directly. Form rippled in what might have been discomfort. The Council will issue a formal condemnation, and we will impose economic sanctions, of course. Sanctions? Sarah repeated the word like it tasted foul. An entire species has been murdered, and you're Going to write them a strongly worded letter and reduce their trade quotas. Admiral Chen, you are young to galactic politics, Quell said with that tone of patient condescension that humans had learned to hate. The Viraxis Combine is a significant power, and direct military action would destabilize the region and cost countless lives. More lives than 7 billion, Marcus muttered, but loud enough to be heard. Quell ignored him. The Council has maintained peace for 10,000 years by avoiding unnecessary conflicts and accepting that some injustices cannot be resolved through force. Sarah felt something cold settle into her bones. You mean this has happened before? Regrettable incidents occur? Quell acknowledged, but the alternative is total war, and the Council learned long ago that peace requires compromise. The Cathari didn't get to compromise, Sarah said. They're all dead. She turned back to her screens. My investigation is complete, and I am returning to Earth to make my report. Council expects humanity to accept our judgment on this matter. Quell warned, noted. Sarah replied without looking at the ambassador. Journey back to Earth took 3 weeks at faster-than-light speeds. Sarah spent that time preparing her report. And watching the recordings over and over, she made sure every human government received copies. Every news network got the footage. Every citizen of Earth saw the Cathari. Children huddled in their final moments by the time the constellation reached. Earth orbit, the entire planet, was in upward protests. Filled the streets of every major city. Humans who had never cared about galactic politics were now demanding action. The same species that had spent 50 years trying to be accepted as civilized was remembering what it felt like to be angry. Sarah was summoned to Geneva, where the United Earth Security Council met in emergency session. Stood before representatives from every nation and every territory, and presented her findings. When she finished, there was silence. Then the Secretary General stood. The Council's response is unacceptable, he said. Humanity did not claw its way up from nothing and reach the stars. Just to watch genocide be met with paperwork, votes were cast, motions were passed, and Admiral Sarah Chen received new orders. She was given command of the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Her mission parameters were simple and terrifying in their clarity: find the Viraxis Combine and destroy their ability to wage war, total dismantlement of their military infrastructure. No negotiations. No surrender accepted until they were completely incapable of threatening another species ever again. Sarah returned to her ship. She thought about the Cathari teacher who had sung to her students as they died. She thought about the mother's lullaby. She thought about the official begging the galaxy to remember. We remember, Sarah said quietly to herself, and we're done playing civilized. The Terran Defense Fleet began to mobilize. Humanity had tried being peaceful. Now they would try something. They were much better at war. The emergency session in Geneva lasted for 3 days straight, and representatives from every Earth nation watched the Cathari. Footage in complete silence. When the images of the children appeared on the massive screens, several diplomats wept openly. These were people who had negotiated treaties and managed crises and survived political battles that would break normal humans. But this was different. This was not politics. This was murder on a scale that humanity had not witnessed since its own darkest days. Ambassador Li Wei from the East Asian Coalition spoke first. We came to the stars believing the galaxy would be better than we were, she said. We hid our weapons and our history because we were ashamed and we wanted to be worthy of joining something greater. She gestured at the frozen image of Cathari families. But the galaxy is not better than us, and they have forgotten what it means to stand against evil because it is hard. The European Union representative nodded. The Council species tell us this is normal, and they say we must accept galactic realities and that peace requires compromise, but they are wrong. Peace built on accepting genocide is not peace. The African Union delegate added, it is cowardice dressed in diplomatic language. Admiral Chen stood at the podium and presented the military analysis. For 50 years, humanity had understated its capabilities, had built weapons and ships and trained soldiers while telling the Council they were merely maintaining a modest defense force. The galaxy thought humans had perhaps 200 warships. The actual number was closer to 2,000. We have been preparing, Sarah admitted, not because we planned for war, but because we never fully trusted that the galaxy's Laws would protect us, and now we know we were right to be cautious. She pulled up schematics of weapon systems that made the assembled politicians pale kinetic kill vehicles that could accelerate to a fraction of light-speed drone. Swarms controlled by quantum-linked electronic warfare systems. Designed to cripple enemy fleets and, perhaps most terrifying, were the psychological operations. Protocols developed from humanity's long history of conflict, the Vraxis have never fought a species that remembers total war, Sarah continued. They raid and they conquer, but they fight within the rules the galaxy has established. They expect their enemies to do the same. We are not going to follow those rules. Secretary General Amati stated flatly, if we do this, we need to understand what it means. The room fell quiet. The Council will condemn us, the Russian Federation, representative said. Other species will call us warmongers and butchers. Let them leeway, replied. We spent 50 years begging for acceptance, and where did it get us? And where did it get the Ketheri? 7 billion dead, someone muttered, and the killers got sanctions. The debate raged for hours. Some argued for working within council structures, others demanded immediate action, but as the discussion continued, a consensus emerged. Humanity had a choice. Could accept galactic norms and let the Kethari deaths be just another footnote in the Council's archives. They could reject those norms entirely and show the galaxy what happens when you murder humanity's friends. The vote was called. It was unanimous. Earth would respond with military force. Objective was not conquest or revenge in the simple sense. It was dismantlement. The Varaxis Combine would be systematically stripped of every weapon and every ship and every facility that could threaten another species. We are not doing this because we are angry, Secretary General Amati said as he signed the authorization. We are doing this because it is right, and because if we do not, then the next genocide will happen, and the one after that, and the galaxy will keep turning while species die. He looked at Admiral Chen. You have operational command, and your rules of engagement are as follows. No civilian casualties. If they can be avoided, and no targeting of non-military infrastructure, but everything else is authorized. Proportional justice, Sarah said. For every Kethari murdered, we destroy one. Brax's military asset, and they killed 7 billion Kethari. So, we have a lot of work to do. The phrase caught fire across Earth's networks. No more playing civilized. Became a rallying cry. Humans who had never agreed on anything suddenly united behind a single purpose. Tehran Defense Fleet began mobilizing. From shipyards hidden throughout the solar system, ships emerged from facilities on Luna and Mars, and even from the asteroid belt. Council's intelligence services watched in shock as humanity's true military strength revealed itself. Ambassador Quell sent urgent messages to Earth demanding explanations. You told us you had minimal defensive capabilities, the Civici diplomat complained. We did not violate any treaties, the Earth representative replied calmly. We simply did not tell you everything, and you never asked the right questions. This is deceptive. No, the human ambassador said. Deceptive is telling genocide victims that sanctions will bring justice, and deceptive is maintaining peace by letting the strong devour the weak. We are done being deceived at the fleet assembled at Mars 2,000 warships of various classes, from small fast attack corvettes to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything the Council had seen humanity build. Admiral Chen addressed the fleet from the bridge of her flagship. We are not pirates, and we are not conquerors. Her voice carried to every ship. We are going to dismantle an empire that believes it can murder with impunity. The rules of engagement are clear, and no civilian casualties, and no unnecessary destruction. But within those parameters, you are authorized to use any and all force required. The Vrasis killed our friends, and they did it because they thought no one would stop them. They were wrong. The fleet moved out. Tits. Destination was the Vraxis border. 3 weeks of travel at maximum FTLDURING. The journey. Sarah received messages from unexpected sources. 17 different species sent encrypted communications. They were small civilizations that had suffered similar attacks over the centuries. Some had lost colonies. Others had been forced to surrender territorial. Had appealed to the Council and received nothing but sympathetic statements. We cannot help you openly, one message read. But we pray you succeed where we could not. Another was more direct. Burn them down and make the galaxy remember that there are still species with spines. Sarah kept these messages private. She did not want the fleet thinking they were fighting for anyone but the Ketherbot. She made note of every species that had reached out, if humanity survived this. And if they succeeded, then maybe they could build something better than the Council, something that actually protected the weak instead of just pretending to. The fleet dropped out of FTL at the Vraxis border sensor arrays, detected them immediately, and Vraxis defense stations went to alert status. Sarah opened a general broadcast on all frequencies. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. She said the Vraxis Combine has committed genocide against the Cathari. People in violation of all civilized law. The Galactic Council has failed to provide justice. Therefore, humanity will provide it instead. We are implementing what we call proportional justice for every Cathari murdered. We will destroy one Vraxis military installation or ship or weapons facility. You killed 7 billion Cathari. We are here to collect 7 billion debts. Surrender your military assets now, and this can be done without bloodshed. Refuse, and we will take them by force. The Varaxis response came 30 seconds later. It was laughter. Pathetic mammals, the Varaxis commander sneered. You dare threaten the Combine with your primitive toys and go home before we add Earth to our collections. Sarah smiled without humor. Weapons free, she ordered. Let's teach them what primitive means. The first battle of the Vraxis border lasted 4 hours when it was over 15. Vraxis defense stations were molten debris, and 23 Vraxis warships were scattered atoms. Humanity had lost to corvettes. Galaxy watched the battle reports in stunned silence. Earth had not just won, they had dominated, and the war had only just begun. The Varaxis Combine had ruled their region of space for 3,000 years, and in that time, they had crushed 17 rebellions and absorbed 23 smaller species into their empire. They were apex predators, both literally and figuratively. Standing 3 meters tall, with armored scales and claws like razors, they had evolved as pack hunters on a world where only the vicious survived. Their military doctrine reflected their nature: overwhelming force combined with calculated cruelty. They did not negotiate, and they did not retreat, and they had never lost a war. Admiral Sarah Chen studied the Vraxis psychology reports as her fleet advanced deeper into Combine territory. They think we are prey, she told her command staff. Every species they have encountered either submitted immediately or fought according to galactic warfare conventions. They have never faced an opponent willing to match their brutality. Commander Marcus Webb pulled up tactical displays showing the next target: a massive shipyard complex orbiting a gas giant designated Vraxis Station 7. Intelligence says this facility produces 30% of their capital ships, Marcus reported. Defended by orbital platforms and a fleet garrison of 200 vessels, the Council warfare conventions require us to offer surrender terms and allow non-combatant evacuation. Another officer noted, "Good thing we are not following Council conventions." Sarah replied, "What are our orders, Admiral? We broadcast our standard warning and give them 10 minutes to evacuate civilians, and then we level it." The Terran fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system. Sarah opened a channel to the shipyard. "This is Admiral Chen to Vraxis Station 7, and you have 10 minutes to evacuate all civilian personnel and surrender your military assets, or we will destroy this facility." The Vraxis commander's response was predictable. "You think you can threaten us with your weak human technology, and we will crush you like the insects. You are 9 minutes, Sarah said, and closed the channel. The Vraxis fleet launched immediately, 200 warships accelerating toward the human formation. Fought in the traditional style taught by the galaxy's military academies, organized formations and concentrated fire and maneuver warfare designed to minimize casualties while achieving objectives. The Terran fleet fought like humans had fought for millennia. The first wave was not ships, but weapons, thousands of kinetic kill vehicles moving at relativistic speeds. They were simple chunks of dense metal accelerated to a fraction of light speed. Shields could stop them because the energy required to move that much mass that fast was converted to destructive force. On impact, the Varaxis fleet tried to intercept them, but the math was brutal. You cannot dodge something moving that fast when you detect it 70 Varax's ships simply ceased to exist in flashes of released energy. The survivors faltered they had never seen weapons like this. The galactic civilizations had banned kinetic kills millennia ago. It's too dangerous, and too indiscriminate. Humans had never signed that banned second wave launch. Sarah ordered the drone swarms, deployed thousands of small autonomous craft, each one controlled by distributed AI systems that made decisions faster than biological minds could process. They swarmed the Vaix's formation like piranhasins. Visual drones were weak, but they attacked in coordinated patterns that overwhelmed point defense systems. They did not try to destroy ships. They disabled them, targeting sensors and communication arrays and weapon systems and engines. Within minutes, half the remaining Varax's fleet was crippled and drifting. Manned squadrons advance. Sarah commanded now. The Terran pilots entered the battle. They flew with a recklessness that shocked the galaxy. Human pilots accepted risk levels that other species considered suicidal. They dove through crossfire and executed maneuvers that pulled GI forces that would kill unaugmented biology, but human pilots were augmented neural implants and genetic modifications and chemical enhancement. They were weapons as much as the ships they flew. The battle lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, the Varax's garrison was destroyed, not defeated or routed, but completely annihilated. Sarah gave the order, and the shipyard died. Next, precision strikes from the fleet's heavy weapons. The construction bays melted, the dry docks collapsed, the manufacturing facilities became clouds of superheated metal. 187 installations destroyed. Marcus reported 7 billion to go. The news of the shipyard's destruction spread through the galaxy at the speed of light. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions. Ambassador Quell demanded humanity cease operations immediately. You are in violation of 17 different warfare conventions, the Civici diplomat protested. The Council does not recognize your authority to wage this campaign. The human ambassador listened politely. The Council had its chance to provide justice. She replied, "You chose not to, and now Earth is providing it instead. If you continue, the Council will be forced to authorize military intervention against Earth. You can try," the human said without concern, "but before you do, I suggest you review the battle recordings and ask yourself if you really want to fight the species that just annihilated Varax's fleet." The Council hesitated. They had seen the recordings. Kinetic kills that moved too fast to stop, the drone swarms that fought with machine precision, the pilots who flew like they welcomed death. Several Council species began private communications with their military commands. The assessment came back: unanimous. Fighting humanity would be extremely costly, perhaps prohibitively so. The Varax's Combine did not hesitate. They marshaled their full military strength. Fleets from across their empire converged on human advance. The Battle of Callus Nebula involved over 1,500 ships. The Varaxis expected the humans to retreat when they saw the overwhelming force instead. Sarah accelerated toward them. "Today, we are going to show them what humans learned from our history." She told her fleet total war does not mean honorable combat, and it means destroying the enemy's ability to fight by any means necessary. Psychological operations commenced. The Varaxis ships began receiving transmissions. Videos of their previous battles against humanity. Footage slowed down to show Varaxis ships exploding in excruciating detail. Audio recordings of Varaxis distress calls as their ships died. Messages claiming that the Varaxis government had already surrendered and these fleets were being sacrificed. The transmissions were lies, but warfare is not about truth. It is about breaking the enemy's will. The Varaxis formation showed the first signs of confusions. Some ships slowed, others requested confirmation of orders. Then the human electronic warfare systems activated. Varaxis fleet discovered that their communications were jammed, their sensors were spoofed, their targeting systems were feeding them false data. They were fighting blind. The Terran fleet struck like a hammer. No fancy maneuvers, just overwhelming firepower. Applied with surgical precision, Sarah had divided her forces into kill groups. Each group targeted specific VOX's formations. They used the nebula itself as a weapon. The dense gas clouds blocked sensors and provided cover. Human ships emerged from concealment at point-blank range and delivered devastating broadsides and vanished before return fire arrived. The Varaxis tried to adapt. They were experienced warriors. but they had never fought an enemy that used every advantage without concern for honor human. Ships rammed damaged Vasis vessels when it was tactically sound. They fired on rescue craft carrying Vasis survivors when those craft were armed. They used surrender signals as bait to lure ships into kill zones. None of this violated the rules of engagement. Sarah had been given no civilians were targeted, but the Varaxis military found itself fighting an opponent that had no intention of being sporting about it. The battle raged for 6 hours when it finally ended. Over 1,000 Varaxis ships were destroyed or captured. The human fleet had lost 83 vessels. The casualty ratio was staggering. The Varaxis had lost over 100,000 personnel. The humans had lost 12,000. Sarah stood on her bridge and looked at the casualty reports. Each number was a human life, a person who had volunteered to fight and who had died far from Earth. She felt the weight of every death, but she did not regret the orders she had given. Continue the advance, she commanded. Next target is the Varaxis core worlds, and we are going to finish this across the galaxy. Species watched the battles with growing fear. Humanity was not just winning, they were dominating. These newcomers, who had seemed so eager to please and so desperate for acceptance, had revealed themselves as perhaps the most dangerous military force the galaxy had seen in millennia. They were not done. The revelations spread through diplomatic channels and military networks and civilian broadcasts. Earth had been hiding its true nature. Humans were not peaceful explorers learning from advanced civilizations. They were predators who had temporarily sheathed their claws. Now those claws were out, and the blood they drew was racist. The Varaxis' supreme command gathered in their war chamber deep beneath the surface of their homeworld. They were the 12 most powerful members of the Combine, and they had ruled absolutely for generations now. For the first time in living memory, they faced defeat. The humans have destroyed 40% of our fleet. The War Master reported. His scales were pale with stress. They have eliminated 62 major installations and 17 shipyards. How is this possible? The Supreme Leader demanded. They are a young species, and their technology should be inferior. Their technology is inferior in many ways, the Intelligence Director explained. But they use it differently, and they fight without honor or restraint. In every battle they had study our tactics and adapt. They are learning faster than we can respond. The Supreme Leader's claws scraped against the stone floor. Then we must force them to stop, and we must remind them why the galaxy fears the Varaxis. What followed was a plan. Born of desperation, the Varaxis sent orders to their forces scattered across neutral territories. Within hours, 23 ships entered systems belonging to species not involved in the conflict. They landed on diplomatic stations and trade hubs. Varaxis soldiers seized 237 civilians from 17 different species. The hostages were brought to a fortified station in neutral space. Then the Varaxis broadcast their demands. The human fleet will cease all military operations. Immediately, the message stated they will withdraw to Earth space and accept council arbitration, or we will begin executing hostages 1 per hour until our demands are met. The galaxy watched in horror. Hostage-taking was not unknown in galactic conflicts, but it was rare. Most species considered it beneath them. Council immediately convened. Ambassador Quell contacted Earth. You must comply with their demands, the Civisthi insisted. Innocent lives are at stake. The Varaxis are counting on you to be civilized. Admiral Sarah Chen received the transmission aboard the Constellation. Shavach, the Varaxis broadcast showing the terrified hostagism. Them were children. Her command staff waited for orders. This is a bluff, Marcus said quietly. They think we will negotiate because that is what civilized species do. Sarah nodded slowly. Get me a location on that station, and I want intelligence on every Varaxis leadership facility within their territory. Admiral, what are we going to do? We are going to call their bluff. Sarah opened a channel that broadcast across all known frequencies. Every species in the galaxy would hear this. This is Admiral Chen to the Varaxis Supreme Command. Her voice was cold. You have taken hostages. Believing this will force us to negotiate. You are wrong. You have 24 hours to release every hostage unharmed. If you do this, we will accept your surrender and provide terms. If you harm even one hostage, we will consider it a declaration that your leadership has forfeited any right to continued existence. She paused. We have identified the location of every command bunker and government complex and leadership facility in Vrax's territory. The coordinates are being broadcast now. Data packets flooded the communication network's locations of underground bunkers, shielded compounds, hidden facilities that the Vraxes thought were secret human intelligence had found them all 24 hours. Sarah repeated, "Choose wisely, the Vraxes supreme." Command received the message with disbelief. She is bluffing. One member insisted no species would sacrifice innocents. The humans have proven they are not like other species. The intelligence director warned they fight total war, and I believe they mean this threat, then we will show them we mean our threat as well, the supreme leader decided. Hours later, the Vraxes executed a dozen hostages. Broadcast the executions to ensure the galaxy witnessed their resolve. The reaction was immediate. Cross-human space populations erupted, enraged Earth's governments received billions of messages demanding action, but Sarah had already given the orders. The Terran fleet split into multiple strike groups. Each group had a specific target. Every Vrax's leadership facility that intelligence had identified, the attacks were simultaneous. Kill weapons dropped out of FTL directly above their targets. They struck before sensors could detect them. Bunkers buried kilometers underground were hit by projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The kinetic energy converted to heat shock vaporized metal, melted iron. Complexes became craters filled with molten stone. The surface government buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. The Vrax's supreme command watched their world shake. Seismic sensors detected the impacts. H1 was equivalent to a nuclear detonation. Actually did it. Someone whispered, "How many are dead?" The death toll was catastrophic. Most of the Vrax's leadership hierarchy was simply going to vaporized in an instant. Those averted were trapped in collapsing bunkers or sealed in sections. Without life support, the supreme leader himself died when his private command center took a direct hit. The kinetic weapon punched through 50 meters of reinforced concrete and 10 meters of solid rock before converting the entire facility into superheated plasma. Sarah did not watch the strike. She did not celebrate. Instead, she was coordinating the second phase. All special operations teams execute. She ordered across the galaxy. Human commandos move. They had been infiltrating toward the hostage station for hours, moving in small craft, using every stealth technology Earth possessed. The Vraxes guards on the station detected nothing until it was too late. Human soldiers breached simultaneously from 6 different airlocks. They moved through the station like ghosts. Every guard who raised a weapon died before they could fire. The hostages were secured in 4 minutes. The entire station was under human control. In 12 not a single hostage was harmed in the rescue. Sarah broadcast the operation. Lived. The galaxy watched human soldiers gently helping freed captives to evacuation ships. They watched Vrax's guards stunned and restrained. They watched humans who had just annihilated enemy leadership treating prisoners with care. Contrast was deliberate. "We do not make war on the innocent," Sarah said in her broadcast, "but those who harm innocents will face absolute justice." The Vraxis leadership chose to execute hostages. They have paid the price for that choice. The Galactic Council was in chaos. Half the members were demanding sanctions against Earth. The other half were too shocked to respond. Then something unexpected happened. 17 species who had secretly supported Earth came forward publicly. They released statements praising humanity's actions for centuries. "We have suffered attacks, and the Council did nothing." The ith representative declared they were a crystalline species whose colony had been destroyed by raiders decades ago. Earth has shown what real justice looks like. It's not empty words and symbolic gestures, but actual consequences for those who commit atrocities. Others joined them. Species that had lost territory or populations or dignity formed a coalition backing Earth's position. The Council found itself divided. The old powers who benefited from the existing system wanted humanity stopped, but they were increasingly isolated. More species were beginning to question whether the Council's way was actually the best way. Public opinion across the galaxy shifted. Many civilians watched the battle recordings with horror, but many others felt something they had not felt in generations. Hope that maybe the strong could be held accountable. Hope that maybe genocide would not be met with just a formal apology. Hope that someone would finally stand up to the empires that preyed on the weak. The Vraxes combined attempted to regroup their Military command structure was shattered, but they still had forces in the field. New emergency council took control. They sent a message to Sarah: "We request terms of surrender." Sarah's response was simple, unconditional. "Your military will be dismantled completely. Your government will be restructured under council supervision. You will pay reparations to every species you have harmed. These terms are non-negotiable." The emergency council balked. "You cannot demand this. And we are still a power." Sarah sent them casualty figures. The Varaxis had lost over 60% of their fleet there. Industrial capacity was reduced by 80%. Their leadership was gone. Their people were demoralized. "You can accept these terms now, or we can continue until you have nothing left to surrender," Sarah stated. "The choice is yours, but make it quickly. My patience has limits." The Varaxis Emergency Council deliberated for 3 hours. Around them, their empire was falling apart. Colony worlds were declaring independence. Subject species were rebelling. Military was suffering mass desertions. They had one choice: survival. "We accept your terms," came the reply. Sarah allowed herself one moment of satisfaction, then she got back to work. The war was ending, but the real challenge was just beginning now. They had to build something better than what they had torn down, and they had to convince the galaxy that Earth's way was the right way that would be harder than any battle. 3 months after the Varaxis surrender, Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the Constellation and watched the former combined capital world below. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, but she knew the truth: cities were still recovering from the bombardment. The population was struggling to accept their defeat. The military occupation was proceeding, but not without resistance. Commander Marcus Webb joined her at the viewport. "The final accounting just came through," he said quietly. "Total Varaxis military assets destroyed or seized: 6,873 capital ships and 15,000 smaller craft and 412 major installations." Sarah did the math in her head. "That is nowhere near 7 billion. "No," Marcus agreed. "But their capacity to wage war is effectively 0. And they could not threaten another species for at least 50 years. Even if we left today, the mission is complete." Sarah nodded, but felt no triumph. The human casualties had been significant: 13,000 dead, 2,000 wounded families across Earth. "We're mourning. What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we find out if any of this meant anything." Sarah replied. The Galactic Council had called an emergency summit. Every member species was required to attend. The location was neutral space, a massive station built specifically for council gatherings. Earth sent a delegation led by Secretary General Amadi. Sarah accompanied him as military advisor. When they arrived, the atmosphere was tense. The council chamber was a vast amphitheater with seats arranged in concentric circles. Our oldest and most powerful species sat in the innermost ring. Younger species like humanity were relegated to the outer. Just accept this. Time Earth had been given a seat in the third ring, a position normally reserved for major powers. Some species had protested this, others had simply accepted the new reality. Secretary General Amadi took his seat, and Sarah stood behind him. Ambassador Quell opened the proceedings. "We are here to address the human military action against the Varaxis Combine. The Civilized stated Earth has violated numerous council laws and warfare conventions. The question before us is what consequences should follow." A murmur ran through the chamber. Several species began preparing to speak. Amadi stood first. "The council does not get to lecture Earth about violations," he said. His voice carried across the chamber without shouting. "For millennia, you have maintained a system that allows genocide to occur with minimal consequences. The Cathari appealed to you for help, and you debated while they died. When 7 billion people were murdered, you responded with sanctions. You failed in your most basic duty to protect the innocent. Earth did not violate your laws. You simply refused to accept that those laws are adequate." Ambassador Quell's form rippled with agitation. "The council has maintained peace for 10,000 years. Your actions threaten that peace. What you call peace is just organized predation." Amadi countered. "The strong prey on the weak, and you pretend this is civilization because you write rules about how much predation is acceptable. Earth rejects this entirely. A species from the inner ring spoke. The Torvin were ancient and powerful. They looked like floating masses of tentacles and eyes. Human arrogance is stunning. The Torvin representative said, "You are children to galactic politics, and you presume to judge systems that have endured for eons. If those systems cannot prevent genocide, then they deserve to be judged." Sarah interjected. All eyes turned to her. "Admiral Chen is correct," a new voice added. The Ith representative stood. "My people lost an entire colony. 2 raiders 40 years ago. The council investigated and found the raiders and issued a strongly worded condemnation. The raiders are still operating. Earth did in 3 months what the council has failed to do in decades. They held murderers accountable. Other species began standing. The 17 who had supported Earth quietly now spoke openly, had a similar story. Attacks that went unpunished. Justices the council had ignored. Species that had learned to accept that some wrongs would never be righted. "You speak of isolated incidents," the Torvin argued. "The council cannot wage war every time a crime occurs. The Cathari genocide was not an isolated incident," Amadi said. "It was the inevitable result of a system that treats mass murder as a diplomatic inconvenience. And if Earth had not acted, the Vraxis would have done it again, probably to one of the species in this chamber." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Everyone knew he was right. The Vraxis had been growing. Bolder intelligence suggested they had been planning additional territorial expansion. "What exactly does Earth propose?" Quell asked. Finally, Amadi pulled up a document. "Earth proposes the formation of a new compact. The Compact of Sapient Rights Member Species agree to enforce actual consequences for genocide and slavery and similar atrocities. Not sanctions or condemnations, but military intervention if necessary. Any species that commits genocide faces immediate action from all Compact members. No debates and no committees and no delays." The reaction was immediate. Half yes. The chamber erupted in protest. The other half listened intently. "You propose to start wars across the galaxy," someone shouted. "We propose to prevent wars by making the cost of aggression too high to bear," Amadi replied. "The current system allows empires to calculate whether the benefits of conquest outweigh the diplomatic costs. We will make that calculation impossible. Attack a defenseless species, and you face the combined military might of the Compact? No exceptions." The debate raged for hours. The old powers argued this would destabilize everything. The victim species argued it was long overdue. Smaller civilizations calculated which side would better protect their interests. Sarah watched it all and realized something. This was not going to be decided by rhetoric. It would be decided by power. Earth had proven it could fight now. It needed to prove it could lead. During a recess, she approached several delegations. Privately, she spoke with the Ith and with other species who had suffered. "We are not asking you to follow Earth blindly," she told them. "We are asking you to stand with us for a principle. That sapient life has value, that genocide is never acceptable, that the strong have a duty to protect the weak. Will you stand with us one by one?" They agreed. The council reconvened. A coalition head for Med-23 species announced they were joining Earth's compact. It was not a majority, but it was enough. Galactic Council faced a choice. They could attempt to sanction or expel the compact members, but that would split the galaxy, or they could adapt in. The end politics won over pride. The council voted to recognize the compact as a legitimate organization. Did not endorse its principles, but they acknowledged its right to exist. They quietly began incorporating some compact ideas into council law. The enforcement mechanisms were still weak, but they were stronger than before. Sarah knew it was not enough, but it was a start. As the summit concluded, she walked through the station corridors. Many species avoided her, others nodded with respect. A few approached to shake her hand in the human custom. Of them was a young Kethra. Sarah stopped in shock. "I thought," she began, "you are all gone." "Not all." The Cathari said. "She was barely more than a child. Some of us were off-world when it happened. Students and diplomats and travelers, maybe 10,000 total. We are all that remains." Sarah felt tears forming. "I'm so sorry. We did not save them." The young Cathari touched Sarah's hand gently. "You avenged them," she said, "and you made the galaxy safer for us survivors. We will rebuild, and when we do, we will remember that humanity stood for us when no one else would." Sarah knelt to be at eye level with the child. "The galaxy failed you. She said, "Earth will not the compact. Will protect what is left of your people, I promise." The Cathari embraced her. Sarah held the child and thought about everything that had led to this moment. 7 billion dead, thousands of human soldiers lost, an empire dismantled, day galactic order challenged all, because humanity had refused to accept that some injustices were too big to feed us. She returned to the constellation. Sarah received a message from Earth. A memorial was being built. It would honor the Ketha Reverie. Name of every person killed would be inscribed. 7 billion names. It would take decades to complete, but Earth would see it finished. Sarah stood on her bridge and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, other species were watching, wondering if Earth would maintain its principles or if humans would become just another empire pursuing their own interests. "Set course for the compact assembly point," she ordered. "We have work to do." The fleet moved out behind them. They left a galaxy that was beginning to change. Some species were joining the compact, others were reconsidering their own policies. A few empires were quietly scaling back aggressive plans because now there was a cost. Earth had shown the galaxy what happened when you murdered 7 billion innocents. You face consequences, real ones. The phrase that had started as a rallying cry became Earth's doctrine. No more playing civilized. It did not mean becoming barbarians. It meant enforcing civilization with force when necessary, with diplomacy when possible, but always with the understanding that some lines could not be crossed. Without response, Sarah sat in her command chair and pulled up an image of the Cathari homeworlds, the dead world where this had all begun. "We remember," she said quietly, "and we will make sure the galaxy never forgets." The constellation jumped to faster than light speed. War was over, but humanity's mission was just beginning. They had torn down an empire. Now they had to build something better, something that would protect the weak,